Bond market dynamics and the illusion of yield, securing purchasing power in a distorted yield environment. I. The yield that beguiles. A U.S. government bond promises you $5 a year for 10 years on a $100 investment. At the end, it hands you back your original principal plus $50 in steady, reliable payments. In the financial world, this is considered the epitome of safety, the bedrock upon which pensions, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, and even central banks structure their portfolios. What's not to like? A 50% return on risk-free capital over a decade. It's clean, elegant, mathematical. But if it seems too good to be true, it is. This is the first layer of financial seduction. Yield that looks like wealth creation, but may actually be a slow erosion of real value, hidden behind layers of complexity, academic jargon, and media spin. The bond market dazzles with its structure and stability. But look closer, and the confidence gives way to something else entirely. Something fragile, extractive, and deeply misleading. What begins as an awe of the math turns into suspicion. Where does this yield actually come from? Who pays it? How is this sustainable? This is where the unraveling begins. 2. The technical mechanics where the magic begins. The beauty of the bond market lies in its internal logic. Prices and yields dance in perfect inverse symmetry. When interest rates fall, bond prices rise. When rates rise, bond prices fall. It's not chaos, it's calculus. At the heart of it all is this equation. Ladies and gentlemen, at the heart of global finance, beneath trillions in assets, sovereign debt, pension funds, and risk-free returns, sits this equation. This is the bond valuation formula, where coupon is your periodic income, YTM yield to maturity is the discount rate, N is the time remaining. It tells us what a bond is worth today based on all the cash flows it's going to deliver in the future, discounted by the market's required yield, or YTM, yield to maturity. On the left, we have price, what you pay today. On the right, a sum of all future coupon payments, your periodic income, and the face value you'll get back at maturity, all of it discounted by the yield the market demands. Now, why does this matter? Because this one formula determines how trillions of dollars are priced. It explains why bond prices fall when yields rise. It governs central bank behavior, long-term debt strategy, and ultimately, how real or illusory your returns actually are. This formula feels like a promise. It's deterministic, emotionless, governed by time and interest rates. The longer the maturity, the more sensitive the price. This is called duration, the average time-weighted sensitivity of a bond's price to interest rate changes. Then there's convexity, the subtle curvature that makes bond prices rise faster when yields fall than they fall when yields rise. To a trader, this is a playground. A bond bought at 5% looks dull until interest rates drop to 3%. Suddenly, that bond is golden. Not only does it still throw off $5 a year, but it becomes a coveted asset. Its price rises. A profit is booked. The capital gain is locked in. And this isn't theory, it's practice at the highest level. High net worth individuals, HNWIs, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, all use this mechanism. They don't just hold to maturity, they trade the duration. They bank on rate cycles. They roll from one position to the next, stacking yield and appreciation. But even in this technical ballet, a question lurks, unasked. Where does the yield really come from? Is it from productive growth? Tax surpluses? No, it's not what it seems. That question leads us deeper, beyond formulas, into the architecture of financial reality. The cracks in the facade, unsustainable foundations. At first glance, the yield appears earned, offered in exchange for lending your capital to a trusted borrower, the state. You provide liquidity, the government promises interest. A simple exchange. But peel back the mechanism, and the facade begins to fracture. Where does the state get the money to pay you back with interest? The math is damning. Tax revenues? They barely cover mandatory spending, entitlements, defense, interest on existing debt. Economic growth? Slowing, uneven, and nowhere near exponential enough to cover compound liabilities. Productivity gains? Stagnant in many sectors. So what's left? More debt. The government borrows to pay back previous debt, rolling it forward in perpetuity. New bonds pay off old bonds. Fresh capital is brought in under the pretense of yield, only to be paid later by future issuance. A sovereign-scale Ponzi structure politely called monetary policy. Consider this. At a $36 trillion U.S. national debt, even a modest average interest rate of 5% translates to $1.8 trillion per year in interest alone. That's nearly half of all annual tax receipts just to stand still. And it compounds year after year. This is not stability. It's musical chairs played with sovereign debt. And the game isn't limited to the U.S. Every nation with a fiat currency and a bond market plays along. The Bank of Japan, the ECB, the UK Treasury, they all issue, roll, and refinance, hoping growth, demographics, or central bank sleight of hand will keep the illusion alive. Pension funds bet on this system. Insurance companies rely on it. Nations depend on it. But nothing compounds forever, especially not obligations divorced from real productivity. And that's the core fragility. The yield is not earned in any traditional economic sense. It's manufactured, leveraged into existence against future promises. That would be bad enough on its own, but what happens when the very measuring stick of value, the currency itself, begins to erode? That's where we go next. This content is brought to you by Bobby Giggs. Promote your brand here and reach a wide audience across platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Follow the links in the description to get started. Section 4. The illusion of real yield, misdirection as policy. If the bond yield is a mirage, then inflation is the desert heat that keeps it shimmering in front of you. Real enough to chase, never enough to quench. Every yield has a shadow, inflation, and the space between them is supposed to define your real return, the actual increase in your purchasing power. But what if that shadow has been manipulated? What if the whole system is built on misreporting how much value your money is actually losing? Governments, through institutions like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, publish consumer inflation rates, CPI, that serve as the official record of how much prices are rising. These figures directly shape monetary policy, bond valuations, real yield calculations, cost of living adjustments, public perception. But CPI is no longer a neutral yardstick. Over decades, it has been systematically altered. Substitution. If steak gets expensive, assume people switch to chicken, therefore no inflation. Hedonics. If a new car has better features, any price increase is quality adjusted away. Weighting shifts. High inflation categories like housing and energy are minimized. The result? An index that no longer reflects the lived reality of the average person. Real inflation may be 5 to 8%, while the official figure reads 2 to 3%. And this is no small error. It's a structural sleight of hand. You think you're earning 5% and losing 2% to inflation. In reality, you might be earning 5% and losing 6%, a net loss, masked as a gain. The deception is subtle, elegant, and devastating. But gold doesn't lie. Neither does oil, or real estate, or groceries. A $140 bond payout that buys less gold than your original $100? A decade of compounding returns that can't buy a house, a car, or even rent in the same zip code. That's the signal breaking through the noise. The illusion of yield is anchored in the illusion of price stability. And the media, economists, and central bankers, whether by complicity or ignorance, repeat the fiction. And the public? They keep playing along, never asking, if I'm getting richer, why does everything cost more? That's when the Truman Show starts to flicker, and the seams of the set become visible. The Truman Show moment. The great reveal. At some point, the illusion thins, the set cracks, the script falters, and you begin to see it. The entire financial system is a stage. And the yield, your precious, hard-earned, risk-free yield, was just a prop. The lights come on and reveal the full scope of the deception. You were told to save. You were told to invest safely. You were told that 5% was a good return, that the bond market was a place of order, reason, discipline. But nobody told you the truth, that your dollars are melting while you sleep, that your real return has been negative for years, that everyone from the Treasury to the central bank relies on your ignorance to keep the game running. The most painful part? It's not malicious actors in the shadows. It's an entire class of well-credentialed professionals, from academics to asset managers, repeating falsehoods because they don't know anything else. They quote CPI like scripture. They talk about balanced portfolios and diversification while the floor is collapsing under them in real purchasing power terms. Meanwhile, your dollar buys less food, less energy, less rent. Your bond may yield 5%, but everything around you inflates by 7%. Your real yield is negative 2%, and nobody calls it what it is: theft. The media repeats the script. Markets are healthy, inflation is under control, the Fed has the tools, the yield curve has normalized, all while the foundation cracks. This is the Truman Show moment, when you realize you're inside a simulation of stability, and the exit sign is marked. Purchasing power. Not ROI, not alpha, not Sharpe ratio. Purchasing power. That's the only thing that matters, because that's what wealth actually is. What you can do, what you can buy, what you can keep. Everything else is theater. Conclusion toward sovereign wealth of a new kind. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, what comes next? First, a redefinition of wealth itself. No longer is it sufficient to chase yield in a fiat-based maze of misdirection. No longer can institutions or individuals afford to measure success in nominal returns while ignoring the reality of what their capital can actually command in the world. True wealth is not what you earn, it's what you preserve. Not what you are paid, but what you can still buy. Not yield in percentage points, but purchasing power in real goods, energy, and time. This is the pivot point, the moment when sovereign individuals, smart capital allocators, and forward-thinking institutions must leave behind the illusory comfort of traditional benchmarks and embrace something older, harder, and more honest. Gold as a store of value immune to political manipulation. Bitcoin as programmable scarcity and an exit from fiat inflation. Energy, land, and productive assets as anchors in the physical world. Hard collateral, not paper promises. We need a new form of sovereign wealth, one that transcends nation-states and accounting gimmicks, a form rooted in truth, not trust. Because the future belongs not to those who chase nominal gains, but to those who secure real value in a world where illusions no longer hold. And it starts with asking the question that breaks the spell. What is my yield really worth? Once you ask that, once you step outside the Truman Show, there's no going back. Now you see the system for what it is. Now you can choose to play the real game.